My name is Karen Houle. I come from Canada. I work at the University of Guelph, which is close to Toronto. And I have the enormous pleasure of introducing you to our keynote speaker this morning, Serenella Iovino. I had to say in my head, Serenella. And so how I helped is I sing the Tom Waits song, the Tarantella, to help me. You know this song? It's great. No, but it's... If you know it, it's very helpful. Serenella Iovino. Okay. J'ai le très grand plaisir de vous introduire professeur Serenella Iovino, who is originally, as some of us know, from Italy. She's an Italian cultural and literary theorist, and we share many interests in common. She's also a philosopher and teaches environmental philosophy, environmental ethics, land art. No, it's okay, land art, it's okay. Yeah, no, for you, you have to go like this, land art. And what's closest to my heart is post-humanist theory. It's okay? This light to come down. Okay, that's a technical issue. We'll continue with that. She's currently professor of Italian studies and environmental humanities, which is an area of study that's opening up quite rapidly in North America, at UNC Chapel Hill. Fantastic. We're very glad to have you in North America. Great. And is a pioneer in thinking through material eco-criticism. And I'm not involved very much with this group, but I understand that she's the co-founder. This is a group that many of you are involved with, which is EASCLCF. How do you say it in a word? ISLC. It sounds German. Vienna. ISLC. Co-founder and past president of ISLC. It's okay? It's okay with this? So today, I also wanted to say that I discovered, doing a little bit of research to introduce Serenella this morning, that a book of hers has won a number of major book prizes. And the book is Eco-Criticism in Italy, Ecology, Resistance, and Liberation, as we always have in Italian context. These are closely woven in 2006. 2016. Thank you very much. Okay, so please help me in welcoming Serenella. We're about 15 minutes behind, so we're going to continue. We'll end this session at 12:15. Her presentation is 45-ish minutes. This will leave us 15 minutes for questions at the end. And she said that she's perfectly happy to take questions in French, but will respond probably in English to these questions. Okay, so please help me in welcoming Serenella Iovino.
Thank you so much, Karen, for this generous introduction. And before I get serious, let me make a fool of myself and thank you in French. So, merci beaucoup à Béné, à Margot, Caroline et Claire, pour le cadeau de couleur et de lumière que vous m'avez fait pendant chaque journée que j'ai passé avec vous tous, ici à Perpignan. C'est un grand privilège d'être ici avec vous et de partager avec vous les idées et la matérialité qu'on partage déjà. Peut-être on le sait pas. Mais, okay, stop. It's okay. Okay, the spirit of impromptu va me laisser, and donc I go back to the written text. Thank you so very much. My lecture's title is, as you can see on the screen, The Invisible Wild, Dilemmas and Resources of the Anthropocene Garden. And it's based on a period that I was art editor of a journal which is called Ecozona. And I was actually looking for artists. And every issue of the journal had a topic. And that special topic was green computers and video games. So not exactly my cup of tea. But of course, when you are insufficient, you make coalitions and you create, you ask for help. And someone passed me the name of an artist, a Japanese, an American artist of Japanese ancestry living in Germany and doing virtual art. And you will see her and their work in this paper, which also has a personal story because, okay, I met Tamiko during a period of during my fellowship last year at the Rachel Carson Center in Munich, which many of you might know, and of course, this combination of atmospheres, experiences, conversations changed everything and produced the reflections that I'm going to share with you today. Okay, let's start. In the heart of the city where I thought until last year, Turin, there is a museum with a unique name, Parco Arte Vivente, the Park of Living Art. You can access it through a modern building, a house full of light contained by glass and wooden walls. Seen from the inside, the museum is not particularly big. The larger part is outside. A garden surrounds the house with a gigantic clover leaf, trèfle. You can see that, yes. And Nathalie Blanc was there when it was built, so it's an involuntary homage to her. Trèfle by Dominique Gonzalez Forster, and this clover is carved into the ground and covered with ivy. Spreading over the museum's roof is another garden, Jardin Mandala, designed by the French landscape architect Gilles Clément. A self-propagating collection of resilient plants that interact perfectly with the surrounding flora. Bees, temporary installations, array clay oven, urban vegetable gardens, and creative emergencies inhabit this former industrial area, expanding over nearly 2.5 hectares, where every project lives in constant co-evolution with the place and other artworks. So this is the perfect example of urban wild, but sort of a controlled wild, a co-created wild. That the garden designed by Piero Gilardi, the legendary father of Arte Povera movement, is an epitome of contemporary hybrid landscapes is perfectly evident to the visitors. Surrounded by buildings, cut through traffic arteries, and practically merging with the site of the City Waste Management Company, which is one of the museum's donors, the Park of Living Art is a metaphor for the Anthropocene garden. A residual and resilient nature to show to school kids and with which they can experiment, something to protect and set free before it gets strangled by the smog and reinforced concrete of the city's embrace. I used to visit the PAV quite often. It is a huge treat to walk around the park with Gilardi or hearing about new projects from the director Enrico Bonanate, a former lawyer who decided to quit his job in a law firm and join Piero in this adventure. Here, spots of urban wildness live side by side with media art and Gilardi's famous tappeti natura, nature carpets. Compositions where ambiguous natural vistas and objects are perfectly reproduced in polyethylene and other synthetic materials. Every time I find myself in this inspiring and unusual setting, I cannot help mulling over this encountering of garden, art, and technology. As I wonder about this fascinating ensemble of organic and inorganic, the old question that Joseph Micker asked about the evolutionary role of literature starts resonating in my mind. Is it an activity which adapts us better to the world, or one which estranges us from it? From the unforgiving perspective of evolution and natural selection, does it contribute more to our survival than it does to our extinction? This is Micker. This was Micker in 1972. Inescapably, I end up asking myself, what is the role of art in this wild geopolitical machine that life on Earth has become? And what are the implications of thinking together the garden, both as urban form and artistic trope, and the Anthropocene? In other words, what do we discover if we read Gardens and Anthropocene with and through one another? Well, my response, of course, it's a temporary response and always in becoming. My response to these questions will sound like a provocation, and perhaps it is. But perhaps it will also be a fruitful one. Let's see why. For many centuries, the garden has been at once a theory and a practice for creating order out of chaos. Whether shaped according to the laws of geometry or modeled upon ideals of freedom, gardens are eloquent embodiments of the human aspiration to tame and remake nature. Considered more closely, however, the aspiration to transform nature is also part of the discourse that has supposedly plunged the planet into the Anthropocene. Seen in this light, the Anthropocene, too, is a garden, a colossal, dysfunctional, and wild garden, escaped from the hands of those who triggered it and populated by the material consequences of their ideals and ideologies. Of course, I'm not implying that Anthropocene and garden are two equivalent concepts, and even less that they are two equivalent realities. It is, however, a matter of fact that both the garden and the Anthropocene are enabled by the use, or plunder, if you wish, of resources and the practice of externalizing the costs of their transformation. But while the garden might disguise its externalities, in the Anthropocene world, the mere idea of externality is by definition no longer possible. And for a very simple reason. There is no outside anymore, whether in time, the future, or in space, ocean, atmosphere, colonial lands, the poor backyards. This means that everything stays here, including absent beings and unwanted presences. These are the ghosts and monsters of the Anthropocene, as suggested by this book, Arts of Living in the Anthropocene, a very inspirational volume edited by Anna Tsing and a collective of international anthropologists. As they explain, I'm quoting, "Our ghosts are the traces of histories through which ecologies are made and unmade. Every landscape is haunted by past ways of life." End of quote. Think, for example, of the ruins of old cities, now erased by layers of time and concrete. Think of the traces of past agricultural landscapes, now returned to semi-wild conditions. Or think of the vestiges of former lives in present-day landscapes and ecosystems, like the bee species whose existence we only know of thanks to the fact that a living flower, an orchid, I'm quoting, still looks like the erotic organ of the avid female bee hungry for copulation. End of quote by Donna Haraway. Talking about this extinct bee and the living orchid, its evolutionary companion, left alone by the tricks of evolution, actually. So there's a beautiful essay in this book. These ghosts both prompt and challenge our memories about the lost beings. Their emptiness, however, is compensated by something that continues life dynamics in unpredicted conditions. Such are the monsters. From over-proliferating jellyfish to radioactive mutations, these monsters are driven more by contaminations than by evolutionary processes. So these are the two faces of this garden, the Anthropocene, whose emotional constellation is one of melancholy and amnesia at the same time. But the Anthropocene has the power to mobilize our imagination, too. And this power is key to urge to find new venues and expressive modes for such a collective trauma. Media art is a very powerful tool in this creative strategy, and I would like to bring into this conversation what I consider to be a very eloquent case in point. Monsters and ghosts, indeed, populate the wild experimental gardens appearing in the artworks of media artist Tamiko Thiel, a pioneer in the fields of virtual art and augmented reality. An eco-art activist, Thiel animated guerrilla augmented reality interventions and uninvited performances in prestigious sites such as New York City's MoMA and the Venice Biennale. An American with Japanese roots, for several years she has been working in Munich, and this is where I met her. Her gardens of the Anthropocene in particular are an attempt to challenge indifference and amnesia by creating virtual spaces where a fictional evolution of plant species converges with their monstrous metamorphosis. A public augmented reality installation, Garden of the Anthropocene, was originally commissioned for the Seattle Art Museum in 2016 and then exported to other sites. When on her website, Tamiko talks about the new installations, she uses a metaphor such as transplanted, because you will see why. So taking its cue from scientific research on climate change, the installation imagines a dystopian scenario in which plants face a technobiological mutation. While the originals are organisms capable of extracting nutrients from sunlight and soil, the mutant, ones feed on the electromagnetic radiation of mobile devices and artificial structures such as road signs or light posts. In this way, the new creatures breach the boundaries between organic and inorganic, natural, social, and technological. In this slide and in the next ones, you will see from, in one part of the slide, the original, so the actual plant, and then the artistic mutation that you encounter in this augmented reality installation. Let's start with this one. The virtual mutants occupying gardens of the Anthropocene have all both a common and a Linnaean name. One of the most spectacular specimens is the bullwhip kelp drone, Nereocystis volans, a mutation of Nereocystis lucteana, or bullwhip kelp, that one, a type of algae that becomes here amphibious flying drones fluctuating up and down the hills of Seattle. Let's see the next one. Okay. Another specimen is a flower, Clarkia antenna, a mutation of Clarkia amena, or farewell to spring, here mutated into a succulent whose petals have developed small antennas that detect the presence of mobile devices feeding off the electromagnetic emissions. Other mutants include Camassia radaria, or radar camas, originating from blue camas or Camassia quamash, with pistils morphed into radars, or the airborne algae Alexandrium giganteum or Alexandrium aereum, a mutation of the single-celled microscopic, these are giant algae, but these are a mutation of Alexandrium catenella, which infests the Puget Sound, causing toxic red tides, and is expected to thrive in warming waters. Yeah, again. Ironic and bewildering, these bizarre creatures represent Thiel's artistic way of mobilizing the narrative of the Anthropocene by creating what the artist calls poetic spaces of memory. Spaces where the simulation of an accelerated techno-natural evolution inevitably recalls the organisms threatened by the planetary disorders. In terms of memory strategy as well as ecological awareness, augmented reality eco-art has powerful effects. Not only, in fact, it prompts us to remember natural life forms, but also to problematize the notion of kinship with the unnatural ones. Surrounded by these wild presences, we cannot help interrogating how akin our reality is to the augmented reality of the gardens, and even more, how akin we are to these mutants. Finding ourselves vis-à-vis giant lilies or algae drones might even stimulate our responsibility toward the changing planetary conditions. Why are they here? Perhaps because of us. But other questions arise if you observe all this from an external perspective. To what extent are these gardens entangled with the Anthropocene's dynamics? How real are these monsters? After all, one could say these mutant gardens are only immaterial presences in a landscape inhabited by other, much richer materialities. But is it really so? If we consider the relationship between these thin gardens and the thick wild landscapes of the Anthropocene, in fact, we will see that virtuality in all its forms, and certainly not just in Thiel's installations, conceals a dilemma. To understand why, we should take a closer look to this technology. Augmented reality has innumerable applications, the best known and most widespread of which are the ludic ones. For example, the online video games that drive thousands of players to capture virtual prey using entire cities as their playground. Tamagotchi or wow, article. In many other cases, for example, geolocalization, virtual tags, social networks, we employ augmented reality without even realizing that we are doing so. All these functions, so they are in a way, we are not naturalizing them in our everyday life. All these functions depend on a technology that superimposes a computer-generated image on a user's view of the real world, thus creating a composite view. With the help of a digital device, smartphone, a tablet, or smart glasses, and a connection to a data server, this technology transforms a static setting into a dynamic and interactive one. In this way, the Seattle Art Museum, or any other site, can become the setting for Anthropocene gardens populated by mutant presences and by us along with them. Yet the question remains, where do these virtual monsters exist bodily? And what is their substance? Is their immateriality factual or pretended? These are not rhetorical questions. There is indeed nothing more material than the so-called virtual. These digital forms exist thanks to the network of silica, minerals, metals, plastics, and electricity whose tentacles spread via a very material cloud to our very material cell phones or tablets. And so these gardens are real, and they literally are the Anthropocene gardens. Their topography is a topography of servers, wires, undersea cables, microwave towers, satellites, data centers, and water and energy resources, to quote Alison Carruth. This is something that ecomedia scholars like Sean Cubitt, Jussi Parikka, Siegfried Zielinski, and Salma Monani have seen very clearly. That is why the Anthropocene is also and essentially connected to a geology of the media. Localized in the mineral and metallic components of our computers, televisions, batteries, and electronic devices in general, whose lithic parts include rare earth elements, metallic ores such as the conflict-ridden coltan, and even gold and platinum. Far from being thin and light, almost impalpable, our luminescent clouds obscure an entire world of mines and elements that are in fact as heavy and ancient as the universe. And so, whether or not we perceive it, in these digital gardens are yet another outburst of our geological wildness. A deep time of the planet is inside our machines, crystallized as parts of the contemporary political economy. Material histories of labor and the planet are entangled in our devices, so Jussi Parikka. I have seen with dazzling wonder another specimens of Thiel's Anthropocene gardens. at the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich, in the company of the artist. It was a cold January afternoon last year. The installation title was Wild Garden. And that was ironical, because we were in Munich, one of the least wild city that one can imagine. Anyway, here, thanks to an app I downloaded directly from the museum's Wi-Fi network by scanning a QR code, technical I am, quick response code, with my smartphone, gigantic water lilies, flying engines, and the huge flowers started materializing around me. And my husband that you see in the picture. On my cell phone, I was literally seeing the ghosts that surrounded me, ghosts previously invisible to my naked eye. And they were there, not only on the screens of our tablets. They were at once the ghosts and the monsters of the Anthropocene. They were really there. This spaceship you see was really there, also there, not only virtually. Again, yeah. However innocent and aesthetically sublime, these virtual creatures are part of what Jussi Parikka calls the sphere of media natures, a network of agents where exploited people, non-human natures, and entire habitats are crushed by the same fate that shapes the unequal sociosphere of the Anthropocene. And I have here another quote, which is, anyway, similar to the other one. I'm not going to read it. Here we encounter the enslaved people extracting coltan in a Congo that has never ceased to be a heart of darkness. Or the 40,000 children that, according to estimates by UNICEF and the Amnesty International, extract cobalt from African mines. And the violence, both fast and slow, of an eternal colonialism, which is invisible only to those who refuse to see it. As Jared Farmer bitterly ironizes, I'm quoting, the message on the back of each iPhone, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China, could include an addendum extracted from Africa. And so, however pleasant it might be, it is a matter of fact that our cultural activities depend on these materials and these technologies, including art, might be involuntarily complicit with such systems. Many questions arose during my conversation with Tamiko, a funny, and now you can say why, trilingual dialogue in German, English, and Italian. I don't add Japanese, because of course. The most important ones, however, remained unexpressed on that enchanted afternoon, on which I was able to see flying objects, even in the subway stations of Marienplatz. Here. These questions continue resonating inside me now. What if the price of this exquisite immaterial experience is the wildness of this time? What are the real ghosts and monsters hidden in our gardens and in our PC, smartphone, and all the electronic extensions of our geological selves? But perhaps, even more important, how to deal with the fact that, like Thiel's artworks, this presentation and this entire conference also come from the same geology, the same network of I'm quoting, electronic waste, resource depletion, and globally unevenly distributed relation of labor, end of quote, that makes the substance of the Anthropocene. What are the ghosts and the monsters hidden in our own Anthropocene gardens? And what if, in order to survive in these gardens, we do need the ghosts, these ghosts and monsters? In his volume of essays, Collezione di Sabbia, Italo Calvino devotes an entire devotes an entire section to Japan. Here too, the garden embodies a human-made perfection, where artifice must be visible in every detail. from stones to sand to trees to wooden temples, all is graciously arranged and perfectly planned. Here, literally, all nature is but art. Here, too, however, the sublime comes at a price. As he muses about these gardens, a Japanese student addresses Calvino. "Do you really like all this? I cannot help thinking that this perfection and harmony caused so much misery to millions of people over the centuries." Calvino's response is at once bitter and lucid. But isn't the cost of culture always this? Creating a space and time for reflection and imagination and study presupposes an accumulation of wealth. And behind every accumulation of wealth, there are obscure lives subject to labor and sacrifices and oppression without any hope. Every project or image that allows us to reach out toward another way of being outside the injustice that surrounds us carries the mark of the injustice without which it could not have been conceived. This cycle of culture and injustice materializes when the visitors arrive at a bed of stones, all perfectly harmonized in shape and color, impeccably oval, flawlessly smooth, bright gray and dark gray. These pebbles, the guide explains, came here in the 17th century from every corner of Japan. Each bag of stones was repaid by the emperor with a bag of rice. Calvino writes, "We seem to see the queue of peasants bent double under the bags of stones, snaking across the little bridges and paths. They deposit the loads they have carried from distant regions in front of the emperor, who examines the stones one by one, places one in the water, another one in the side of the lake, and rejects many others. Meanwhile, the attendants busy themselves round the scales. On one dish there are stones, on the other rice." This is the dark side, the invisible wildness of the garden. The fact that behind each garden, the map of planetary extractivism is hidden. The extractivism of both human and non-human resources, with their networks of crises, conflicts, and biopolitical predicaments. Yet, we do need to see these ghosts. Helping us see these ghosts, art, whether embodied in art installation or a Japanese garden, could help us recreate, even in monstrous way, this lost memory. This is indeed a dilemma, but it is the dilemma on which art, on which civilization is based. Calvino's and Till's artwork are powerful examples of how thinking the garden and the Anthropocene with one another, through one another, is important for illuminating the epoch in which we are living. But here, one thing must be stated clearly. Thinking the garden and the Anthropocene through one another does not mean equating them with one another. Although they might fit into a similar net framework, gardens and the Anthropocene are not exactly the same. In fact, despite all its contradictions, the garden also discloses unexpected resources. The theorist of planetary garden, again Gilles Clément, has coined the expression jardin de résistance, gardens of resistance, places where biocultural diversity, interdependence, and creativity, both natural and technological, can thrive. The story I have just told you, my encounter with Tamiko and her art, happened in the city with one of the biggest urban parks on the planet, the Englischer Garten, 375 hectares. Don't ask me how many soccer fields, I should calculate. Anyway, let's say, yeah, almost 400. Gardens are, yeah, because the soccer field is a measure that is a unity of measure that sometimes it's useful to know. It's 0.7 hectares, so it's more than 400 anyway. Gardens are available everywhere to everyone in Munich. Yeah, you see, this is the plant. Even the main institution of the city, the Biergarten, is an ideally democratic way to take the garden outside from class enclosures and deliver it to the population, to the urban population, transforming it into an affordable place for sharing and conviviality. Of course, these gardens have an environmental impact, but their positive influence on people's lives and on the health of urban ecosystems is evidently more significant than the costs. The same applies to Turin's PAV, Parco Arte Vivente. It is an oasis, but an oasis for the entire city, where educational projects and eco-political visions and natural artistic creativity constitute an opportunity for actively rethinking the Anthropocene. This is why gardens are so important in the Anthropocene. They are one of the last presidia of the Holocene, as we know from the famous example of Gezi Park in Istanbul, where the threat to destroy an island of flora and fauna in order to make room for yet another shopping mall and another waterfall of concrete provoked riots and an upsurge of thousands of citizens, unfortunately suppressed. The urban revolt is a way to occupy the Anthropocene, as Marco Armiero says, rethinking the garden as a coalition of humans, flora and fauna through culture. If the price we pay for culture is hidden behind the sublime, perhaps we might use this culture to compensate the very brutality of a world without culture and without gardens. This is, in fact, the real Anthropocene wildness, a world without culture and without gardens, perhaps. Be it in Munich's English Garden, Istanbul's Gezi Park, or Turin's PAV, and even be it Tamiko Thiel's Anthropocene Gardens and the Japanese Zen Gardens visited by Calvino, we need these gardens. But what we need are gardens of resistance and not of destruction, gardens of memory and not sites where the future is only an externality for our excesses. Because after all, humans and gardens, like the humanities that nourish our discourses and visions, the humility we need to survive on a wounded planet, and even the Anthropocene as the age of the human, all go back to a common root: humus, the earth. Thank you very much.
It was a very moving and apt, beautiful presentation. Thank you very much for that. So I'm sure there's questions and commentaries, and it's almost 5 minutes to noon, so we have about 20 minutes. We're good for time.
No, you. I've seen a hand.
Hello. Hi, Serenella. First of all, thank you for a very inspiring talk. It was really, really interesting. I follow your work, and I'm very aware that there's a very strong social impulse and social concern in your work, in your criticism, which I find very, very necessary. So my question is about the use of the word Anthropocene. Every time I think about the word Anthropocene, to me it means you humans are to blame, because you have a spoiled paradise. It's like, and I wonder if what you make of the use of, I'm sure you're familiar with the other word, the other term, capitalocene. Yeah. So what do you make of this? Why do you think one term is more suited than the other, or that's my question?
Well, thank you, Tony. That's of course this is this is the question about the Anthropocene, the question. And of course, I think everybody is aware that the impact of our actions is not the same of whether we are a kid in Congo or Donald Trump, just to quote an example, right? And of course, the anthropos, it's a word that defines a category which might be imaginary, because not all human beings are treated humanely, you see, or are subjects that are capable of acting freely. So, of course, I, of course, share this preoccupation that drives people like Jason Moore, Donna Haraway herself, or Naomi Klein, for example, and many others that talk about this capitalocene. And I think that capitalist systems, of course, I think it's undeniable, they are behind much of the trouble that we are encountering today. I think that capitalocene is also partial description, and because nothing, I mean, capitalism is something which happened in the last, say, let's be generous, 3-4%. Let's say from the end of the Renaissance, almost. But you see, there are so many schools of thought about the Anthropocene. There is even who thinks that the Anthropocene started when we started cultivating, when the agriculture was invented, discovered. So in a way, we could say we have never been Holocenic sometimes. I think that the word Anthropocene has this ability to be a big umbrella and be used. Of course, we must be again aware of what we mean by Anthropocene. But I, of course, agree with you, and I see the point of Anatocene, calling it Plantationocene, or those who call it Homogenocene, or Wastocene. You see. But I think that the multiplication of names is useful as long as we don't lose the focus of the problem. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk to Thiel's use of humor in her augmented reality, as maybe in contrast to other augmented reality artists who are more gloomy or more satirical or any of those things?
Oh yes, she's a very, she's one of the most incredible persons you can meet. She's an artist, but she's also an inventor, she's an engineer. And she has such a sense of humor. And you can see, in fact, that the names she gives to these plants are also mutants, because the latin that she uses is not correct. Sometimes giganteum, she says giganteus. I have Alexandrium giganteus, she puts. So for the purists of Latin, it's also. So in a way, she wants to show, I think, that everything is a mutant, and we ourselves are mutants. And of course, these are ironical encounters, and you know that irony is also, especially when it was used by romantic poets, as the function of diminish your presence in front of reality. So it makes you feel funny, but also inadequate sometimes. And you smile, you are, of course, puzzled in front of these strange beings, but at the same time, you feel that your comfort zone is being pushed away from its usual border. So it's the uncanny that meets the ironic in these artworks. And the fact that this is an augmented reality is also, in fact, ironical, because what does it mean, augmented reality? What is real and what is to augment reality? In fact, can we touch it? I mean, in which respect is augmented? Perhaps there is something we didn't know before. So it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek reference to the noumenon of Kant. Can we touch the noumenon? No, but it can touch us. I mean, It can tickle us, yeah. But as you see, it's. I think that I was reflecting when I was writing this about the correspondence between the word eco, which is oikos, home, and the root of the German word for uncanny, which is unheimlich. Okay, so, and unheimlich has this root heim, which is home. So these are really unheimlich gardens. Gardens that are, in a way, exactly the opposite of a domestic garden, something which reassures you. And irony has exactly this function of let you see what you are your everyday experience in a new light. Deconstruct your certainties, your illusions sometimes. And I think that that's no better way perhaps to address also the issue of the Anthropocene, also because we know the Anthropocene with big A, but we need perhaps to see a smaller, a small A. Anthropos is smaller than the Anthropocene.
I want to add a little follow-up question, just a short question. So we have on the one hand, you said the domestic gardens. So I'm thinking about Les Murs de Versailles, like super, super ordered. And then on the other hand, the gardens, the virtual gardens. But what about the gardens of resistance that you spoke about? Can you make a connection for us between the experience or immersion in the gardens of resistance that you turned us toward at the end and the experience of humor?
Wow. Can you help me? No, I think, yes, of course. I think that the gardens, the Jardins de Résistance that are created by Gilles Clément, of course, they connect immediately to his idea of planetary garden. So Gilles Clément is a theoretician of gardens. I don't have to explain to you what his theories are, but he works a lot with this idea of the tiers paysage, the third landscape. And of course, these gardens of resistance are not gardens in the way the French geometrical garden or the Italian garden of the Renaissance are. I mean, of course, they are gardens that co-emerge with these new landscapes that are around us and inside us, because le tiers paysage is, of course, something that are these industrial zones, abandoned zones, places where there was places of ghosts, in a way, in the sense that Anna Tsing and her colleagues think. So these are places that claim their life back. And gardens of resistance are places where places and people can claim their coexistence back. And therefore, I think that this is very ironical because they don't need to be beautiful. They only need to be alive and alive with one another and mutually productive. And they allow us to see ourselves beyond the category of weed. We were talking about weeds this morning with, Camille. And of course, weeds are a construction. They are plants, and perhaps just to change their perception is already something, or simply yes. There are so many people that are conceived as weeds, yes, and perhaps we should start seeing things in a different way and hear it when irony enters the scene. So it's a form of resilience for new forms of creativity. And we need that, I think.
And also, I think we need to rethink of ghosts. When we think of ghosts, we also think that it's on a peur. We're afraid of them. But we can also maybe also reconceive ghosts as bringing something maybe delightful or funny or humorous or generous. Right? This is also really important. Okay, other questions or comments or wonderings? Oui, Bénédicte?
Thank you very much, Serenella, for this beautiful presentation. This is more a comment, I guess, but you might want to bounce back off of the question. I'm fascinated with as an ecofeminist, what I'm trying to do with language and what we're all trying to do with language is to get rid of binary thinking and dichotomies, right? Conceptual thinking that has led us to where we are because we keep defining one thing in terms of it opposing it, and it has to be either or, either or. So is it a garden? Is it the Anthropocene? Is it virtual? Is it reality? And I'm struck with the fact that, in fact, a lot of your presentation, you know, as we're trying to define with another oxymoron, urban wildness, which, you know, says that basically nothing is purely urban anymore and nothing can be purely wild anymore. You're also, your presentation is also dealing with this other oxymoron, the virtual reality, and that there seems to be a misconception. Another one I deal with a lot in my work is magical realism, because I'm looking at a lot of what these artists are doing with magical realism. And I get so frustrated with the fact that a lot of people seem to think oxymoron in terms of binary opposites, whereas that is precisely the point of an oxymoron. And I feel like you're doing a really great job showing us how there is no virtual reality, of course, is reality, and not what we comfortably started thinking when it came. A lot of people kind of dismissed it, that it was not material reality, and therefore the virtuality of it, so-called virtuality, made it not material reality. And I get the same thing with magical realism a lot, where people, you know, and of course it's a term that has been used in post-colonial context, so, but where basically it says, it does the same thing, that, you know, those terms, what is realistic or what is magical, the opposition between the two is subsumed by using those oxymora. So I'm thinking maybe one of the ways also that art helps us change our perceptions of our environment is because it does precisely that. It focuses, because its oxymoronic potential is so huge and powerful that in fact it challenges all of those wordy concepts that keep us from looking at things as not either or, but and. It is and virtual and real, and it is and magical and it is realistic, and it is urban and it is wild, and so on and so on.
Yes. I think that's, yeah, you said it beautifully, and I want only to add that, I'd like to add that Gabriel Garcia Marquez was always a little bit bothered when they use this label of magical realism. He said, oh, well, I know Macondo very well. It's almost, yeah, and of course our creativity is magical, but it's also embedded in our organic reality. And everything that is around us is at the same time, how many miracles that are perfectly natural exist? Thank you.
Est-ce que c'est Hélène? Oh, there's a question from Hélène at the back.
Thank you very much. Speaking of moving away out of dichotomies, and also as an echo to Antonio's remark, I think we have everything to gain not to think in terms of capital versus no capital. I read only part, unfortunately, of a book entitled Le Capitalocène, which is a French book, but it's full of economics, so I didn't get to the end of it. It's too hard to read for me. But there isn't one capital. I mean, the USSR, this is monopolistic state capitalism, and it is capitalism. There's many sorts of capitalism. So the case that book makes is one, it's not just capital, it's fossil fuel capitalism, so which began with the Industrial Revolution. And today it's financial capitalism. So I think that's very important. And I think your connection between the people working out there somewhere where we never go and the tablets we've got in our palms is completely essential. It's so essential, I can't say how much. And ecology depends on the degree of freedom of citizens.
Thank you very much. You said it beautifully also. And I want to, it's essential to think that the same or similar dynamics can leave behind different ideologies. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. And I want to, I think it was a book of 1997, so well before all this Anthropocene sort of drunkenness, let's say, because it was Caroline Merchant, whom you will know of, especially ecofeminists, but she's an historian teaching in Berkeley. She wrote this very interesting book titled Radical Ecology, in which she was already pointing out how in what you call second world countries, the impact of industrial activities motivated by that kind of ecology. So in the former USSR and in China today we see that, and not only in China. So another regime, another political ideology drove to the exploitation of natures, right? So human and non-human natures, which is part of the causal complex of what we call Anthropocene. Anthropocene. Another name of the Anthropocene is Manthropocene, by the way. And this is an homage to Bénédicte. Let's not forget that everything, there is nothing neutral without insisting. Everybody carries her responsibilities, but their responsibilities, but so there are so many shades. So, but thank you very much.
I think I saw a question at the back. We have time for probably 2 more questions. At the back, please.
Well, I'm going to make a comment. It's not exactly a question, but first of all, thank you for your speech. It was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm a biologist, so I'm trying to connect my world with yours. And like kind of explain what we're going to do tomorrow at 4:30, which is part of a research, but since the point of view of biologists. And it makes perfect sense. Because I was listening to you, and I saw that the author, like some authors, sometimes they created scientific names for the mutants. We are actually considered that since we go in the history of the human being, we're going to get some mutations in our genome. And we made a study of spiders. So we studied spider communities and a park. So that could be your perfect garden that you mentioned of resistance, because we are trying of creating an ecological protected community of some specimens that can be considered extant. In the case of spiders and other animals, what we do is like creating a good environment so they can have something like what they did before. They live in a community, and they started like interbreeding as they adapted to that, even though they're going to go through mutations because of our environment, or technology, or chemical products, or contamination, environmental contaminations, and we're going to do that too. So it's really curious. When we did DNA barcoding, which is part of DNA profiling, so maybe you are more familiar with that word, we noticed that we were doing something that is called alignment, and we have to sequence DNA and align that new DNA with some sequences that we find in databases. And we think the missing bases, because it's not aligned 99%, maybe 90% or less, the missing bases are due to mutations in genes. So I was like trying to connect with you and your conference. So we are going to have that as a result, not only of you said before, it's not only a result of our evolution or adaptation, it's also a result of whatever the nature or the environment that we created and we contaminated is going to influence on us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Two things rapidly. Perfect point. Evolution is driven by casual mutation. So it is exactly the way it works. And without mutation, without this sort of mistakes in coping, genes, you will never have change. You will always be in a sort of passive reproduction or a sort of a xeroxization, if these words exist. But the difference with the discourse that Tamiko does is that in this evolution, and we have so many cases, I mean, everything that we eat is the outcome of a human-induced evolution and mutation. But here, another factor enters the scene, which is technology. So it's a sort of this strange guest that comes uninvited in this game and participates with it. It's not only so genes or natural biological dynamics that are involved, but also something else. And of course, this is the whole point. And another thing that you said that's very interesting is we give names. Names are indeed perhaps so important. They are, of course, they can be criticized and changed, but they have this incredible heuristic function. They help us see things. They help us recognize that specific spider or this specific epoch. Without the name Anthropocene, we wouldn't see the connections between climate change, species extinction, everything that you see around you on the crust of the earth, on the bottom of the ocean, everything as a framework or unequal protection of people, the unequal role played by people around the globe. So all this hangs together because there is this word Anthropocene. Now, we might criticize the word, but it's only a word. But the fact is that these things exist and they are perhaps connected much more than we believed before.
As I promised, one more question, but I can't remember who gave me the hand before. Yeah, a very short question, please, and then we're going to have to break for lunch. So, last question, please.
My question that these gardens of resistance you're talking about are not only created by Gilles Clément, in my view. There is also, in this planet, in the Anthropocene, this whole constellation of poor, resistance, edible gardens, the colony in Germany, les jardins d'ouvriers in France, or sometimes merged with autonomous habitats. Searching for autonomy. So I think it's important not to forget these. And in my thesis, I've studied how these gardens, edible gardens, driven by autonomy, generate their own language, own imaginary, how they generate a kind of art which is completely re-embedded in everyday life, and so which does not depend neither on landscapers, nor on artists, nor on technology. So I think it's important to have this typology of gardens in mind, not only parks. And it seems to me there is some kind of fascination with this notion of Anthropocene for one kind of gardens and overshadowing this popular culture.
I think you're perfectly right. And I think that one of the main examples of gardens of resistance, even though they are not called like this, are Detroit's urban gardens, for example. And there are so many. They are, of course, one of these gardens of resistance. I was using Gilles Clément for the expression, but of course, the word survives, the Holocene survives, thanks to the efforts of these people that don't know don't even know that they are creating a garden of resistance. But thanks to them, just like Les Savants, what was it? It was a beautiful poem by Jorge Luis Borges. They say, one who plants a garden, someone who caresses a dog, a sleeping animal. These people are saving the world. They are saving the world. So even though they don't know that, but thanks to all of them, of course.
Right. So just to remind you of something that Serenella said, is that names help us to see things, but I also want to bear witness to the fact that this paper, honestly, will help me see the stones as we move out of this building differently. And it's already had an effect on how I see the plants in this room. So we thank you for the shift in our perceptions that you've managed through a very beautiful presentation. So please help me to thank everyone.